Van McMahon, baddest dude in all the land. Texas blood as thick as mud, he's Van McMahon. Van McMahon, he's Van McMahon.
All right, you know what that means. It is our weekly conversation, as we do every Tuesday, NBA Daily Assist 2.0 time with our buddy Tim McMahon. Back on the show to break it all down for you. Tim, my man, what's going on?
Doing all right, man. How about you?
We're hanging in. You know, another week and another news cycle to react to. And we got a lot to talk to you about today, certainly. What have you made of the most recent pieces of news, the stuff from Cuban today, his proposal, and we've been talking about it. You had it up and have it up on ESPN.com. Does it have legs, Tim? Do you think this could be a realistic possibility?
You know, I don't know how realistic it is. Obviously, that comes on the heels of this World Cup proposal. I do think where Cuban's proposal makes sense is that there is a desire in a lot of corners of the NBA to fulfill those local TV contracts. I mean, that is just there are massive financial implications if they're not able to fulfill the local TV contracts. Now, the problem is, you know, in most proposals, well, you know, so you're going to ask teams to come back to play completely meaningless games under these circumstances. So, you know, Cuban's proposal at least makes the games meaningful for all but two teams. The Warriors and the Timberwolves are just too far out to have any sort of mathematical possibility of even qualifying for the play-in games, the play-in little tournament that he has in his proposal. But the other 28 teams, you know, several would basically already have their tickets punched to the playoffs, and then, you know, the rest of them would at least have a mathematical chance to compete. And obviously, you know, look, what Damian Lillard told Chris Haynes today is completely understandable. But in this proposal, the Blazers would, you know, they would go into the final, 5 to 7 games of the regular season, that portion of the schedule, in a spot where they would be in that play-in tournament and have a chance to earn their way into the playoff bracket. So that part makes sense. Now, John Hollinger pointed out on Twitter, Cuban also came up with a very creative way to have a play-in tournament that his 7th seed in the West Mavericks would not have to take part in. So, you know, there's a little bit of his own agenda represented for sure.
You know, I may have buried the lead, Tim. I mean, if we go back a little, like, do you feel like we are inching closer to live basketball? Like, what is your confidence level today? Because you're really honest with the stuff, which is why we like having you on. And you know, just to check in, like, your confidence level this week as far as live basketball coming back soon looks like what?
No, I think, I mean, I don't want to say it's a certainty because obviously, you know, things could go south and the circumstances could change. But at this point, it's much more of a how than an if. How will they resume the season? You know, what are the plans? Is it 16 teams? Is it 20? Is it all 30 like Cuban's proposal? You know, 20, that World Cup style proposal, you know, just 16 straight into the playoffs. You know, at this point, I think what the NBA is doing is figuring out the best, you know, the best way to resume the season, much more so than whether they will.
What is your understanding about the players' desire or lack thereof to come back and come back soon? Because we've heard from a number of players, and Chris Paul has come out, and it seems like most of them do want to come back. I think they understand the financial implications. That ultimately is probably the main motivation. Then you hear like Joe Ingles on his podcast, he's a little hesitant. He's got a couple of young kids, and the last thing he wants to do is, put them at risk. I'm not saying he would, but there are players, Tim, that seem to be a little bit concerned. What's your understanding about the overall feel from the players as to if they want to come back and play?
Yeah, and in fairness to Joe, what he said on his podcast was a couple months ago, and then for some reason it entered the news cycle last week. So I think the context is important there. And he clarified on Twitter that should the NBA resume its season, you know, at this point he would be 100% committed to participate and playing with his teammates. And I think that by and large, that is the overwhelming response from players. Players want to resume. Now, Damian Lillard made it clear if the Blazers have nothing to play for, he'll practice, but he's not participating in games. And I understand his perspective on that because they were in a situation where they would have been competing for a playoff spot. And I think that for a lot of reasons, financially and just fairness, that a team like the Blazers, that's I believe sitting in ninth in the Western Conference with a realistic chance to fight for a playoff spot, they should have an opportunity to earn a bid in the playoffs, whether that's purely in a play-in, whether it's some sort of finish the regular season going to play-in like Utes' proposal, whether it's that World Cup style, group stage situation that's being discussed. I think that the Blazers, the Pelicans, teams in that situation will have that sort of an opportunity. Look, could there be some veterans on teams that are out of it that have no interest? Yeah, I mean, that's realistic. Like, I don't know if Steph Curry, with the Warriors mathematically eliminated even Cuban's proposal, would have any interest in playing. I don't think the Warriors would have any interest in him playing. Karl Towns, especially after everything that he's been through, is this a situation where he might just sit the rest of the season and not participate? Sure, absolutely. But again, I think that the vast majority of the players want to compete and want to get paid, and perhaps not necessarily in that order.
Last thing on this storyline, then we'll move on to some other things, Tim. And look, I know this is impossible, but I'm going to ask you, and you go whatever direction you want. If you had to give us your best guess as to when we're going to see live games and what exactly it looks like, what would you say? Best guess.
Yeah. My best guess is that this World Cup style thing picks up steam, and perhaps that's the way they go with the top 20 teams, whether it's 10 from each conference or just the top 20 based on record participating. Again, the problem there is fulfilling the local TV contracts and the financial implications if you don't. But I think that's probably going to be kind of the best compromise. As far as when, you're looking at a 2-week quarantine period, 2 to 3 weeks of training camp, getting the teams to Disney World, perhaps some tune-up games, exhibition games, that sort of thing. We're probably not going to see games that matter until the latter half of July or, in Woj's story today, he said possibly not even until early August.
One of the proposals that's being thrown around, as you well know, is the 16-team tournament, seeded regardless of conference. And if that happened, Tim, what it would mean is the Jazz as a 7 seed would take on the Rockets as a 10 seed. You're probably as uniquely qualified to comment on a 7-game series between these two teams as anyone literally anywhere because you cover both teams. Obviously, no Boyan. That hurts. Mike D'Antoni, in my estimation, has figured out schematically how to really neutralize Rudy. I think it would be tough for the Jazz to win that series. What are your thoughts?
I 100% agree. No question about it. And obviously, the Jazz made some pretty significant roster adjustments after losing to the Rockets again in the playoffs last year. But to your point, arguably the most significant, or kind of 1B to Mike Conley's 1A, Bojan Bogdanovic, would not be available. I mean, you're taking 20 points per game. You're taking, obviously, their best and, most respected three-point shooter and the spacing there. So that makes it that much tougher for the Jazz. And Russell Westbrook and the way they play small ball, I mean, that really does present some pretty major problems for the Jazz. I don't think that's a matchup that the Jazz would prefer to see. I think if you're the Jazz, you like Mark Cuban's proposal much better, because then the 5 to 7 games to finish up the regular season, you've got a chance for those matchups to change.
We got some rough news last Friday, as you well know. And look, we're not New York, we're not Chicago, we're not L.A. We don't have legends pop up all the time because we're a smaller city with one main pro sports team in the Jazz and another professional team with a soccer club, but they're young and the audience is a niche one, and they would admit that. Jerry Sloan is as big of a legend metaphorically and literally as we really have ever had. And I loved him as a person. I was able to get to know him quite a bit. I've known him my whole life and respected him more than I can really accurately articulate. We had a special different show on Friday paying honor to him. Did it the best we could, but I'm sure I stumbled through it wholly inadequate to talk about the measure of a man like that. But your thoughts as you heard that Coach Sloan passed away and ultimately what his legacy sounds like.
Yeah, and, I was not able to get to know Jerry Sloan. By the time I started kind of covering the Jazz on a somewhat consistent basis, he obviously was well into retirement and unfortunately, struggling from a health standpoint. But I mean, you could not find anybody who is more respected throughout the NBA, and whether it's people who, players who played for him, coaches who coached against him, people who played against him back in the day, and I think that obviously he's a Hall of Fame coach. He's one of the great coaches of all time, regardless of not being able to win a ring. I mean, just the longevity and the success that he had in Utah. He will always be remembered as one of the all-time great coaches. I think that maybe not that many people realize what a great player he was, and just two-time All-Star, but really one of the great defensive guards, arguably of all time. And obviously, the way he coached with toughness and discipline, that's the way he played, and he will always be remembered. There's a lot of guys who want to be remembered as tough guys. I don't know if Jerry Sloan necessarily cared that he was remembered as that. It's just who he was. That's just naturally who he was. And I will say this, knowing Darren Williams a little bit, I am glad, and I give a lot of credit to the Jazz organization for kind of facilitating this. I'm glad that D. Will had an opportunity to look Jerry Sloan in the eye, apologize for the way that he handled things late in his Utah tenure, and have a conversation that, as he posts on Instagram, if he wasn't able to, sit down and have that conversation, that's something that certainly would have haunted him for the rest of his life.
What did you make of, and I'm not sure if you've had a chance to listen to the Dream Team tapes. It's been great. I've dug into it over the weekend, really enjoyed it. So audio released now of Michael Jordan saying that he indeed would not play for the Dream Team if Isaiah was on the team. And I don't know that anyone's all that surprised, but it's just further proof that The Last Dance, while wildly entertaining, was not journalism at all. And that's okay. I'm not mad at that. Some people are, whatever. I enjoyed it. But what'd you make of the story that surfaced over the weekend?
Yeah, not surprised. And look, I don't necessarily know if that means that The Last Dance wasn't journalism, because trust me, as a journalist, people lie on the record. The important thing is they're lying under their name. They're on the record. Where you run into a problem as a journalist is when people lie as anonymous sources. And that's why you really have to be careful who you trust in those circumstances. If somebody is going to lie to you, you want it to be their face, their name, their integrity, not yours. And, so Jordan is caught lying on the record. That's basically what that comes down to. And again, I don't think anybody's surprised by that.
All right, my man. Anything you have coming up that you can tease before we set you loose up on the website? I mean, obviously you had a big piece that was released today.
Yeah, I'm working on a few things, but it's one of those deals where I kind of don't want, it's like when right now I'm working on buying a house, actually, and I don't want to get too excited until they're closed. I need to close on a few things before I start talking about them. I would say that.
All right, brother. Well, we appreciate the time today, as we do every single Tuesday. Keep up the great work. Stay safe. Be well. We'll chat next week, all right?
All right. Appreciate it, Spence.